Hi everyone and welcome to tonight's presentation. My name is Anthony Simino and joining me tonight is Michael Simino and also Kayani, one of our leading property managers here at In Real Estate. Just thought I'd like to, or firstly, I'd like to start off by thanking everyone who has joined us tonight, but also that joined last week and sent through emails and called Michael and myself to to pass on their compliments for coming to you last week and providing the information that we did. It was great and really overwhelming with the response we got. So thank you all so much. Tonight, very similar to last week, and for those that are joining for the first time, we're just going to run through in a couple of stages. So we'll be touching on sales very briefly. We'll also be touching on the developments that have happened in the property management space in the last couple of weeks since last time we spoke, and then also interviewing a couple of questions with Kayani. Michael and Kayani will have a chat about what Kayani's seeing on the ground and a day-to-day life as a property manager at the moment. And there's also, as last week, we'll take some Q&As at the end. So please feel free to send through any questions that you have throughout the presentation. Again, if you can keep them sort kind of general in nature and not sort of specific to properties, that would be great. But thank you all so much for joining. At this point, I'll throw to Michael and say good evening.
Hi everybody, thank you again for joining. Just echoing Anthony's comments, the engagement last time was fantastic. We got some really good feedback, so obviously decided to make this a regular occurrence. And look, it may even become a regular occurrence once we're on the other side of this thing as well. So we might just start off. I know we heard from Anthony last time on sales front. Anthony, do you want to maybe just give a brief update on what's been happening in sales over the last couple of weeks and what you're seeing in the market, I suppose?
Yeah, definitely. Happy to sort of give, probably not as detailed as last week, but sort of what's been happening in the last 2 weeks. Since last time we spoke, I personally have done anywhere between sort of 15 to 20 private inspections on properties that are currently got for sale at the moment. So looking back and just looking at sort of numbers and comparing to earlier on in the year and towards the later part of last year when we were able to open for inspections and those sorts of things, we're probably seeing the same amount of buyers. So back sort of late November, December into January, we were probably running between sort of 6 to 10 open for inspections a weekend and seeing somewhere between 15 to 20 buyers at that time. But what we're seeing at the moment and finding that we're dealing with genuine people that are interested in making a decision to purchase, rather than sort of people that would wander out on a Saturday afternoon and have a look at a few properties. So we're not seeing that type of the buyers out there that are just sort of browsing. It is people that have genuinely got an appetite to purchase. From a sales and people that are thinking of selling, a lot of discussions over the last couple of weeks with people that are looking to maybe put things on hold for sort of 6 to 9 months just to see what happens. To see. Our response and my response to that is at the moment is probably to take advantage of what we've got at the moment. We obviously don't know what's going to happen moving forward and what sort of 6 to 9 months looks like. If you were to tell us 6 months ago that would be sitting here tonight talking about what's going on in property management and those sorts of things, would probably all say that we're crazy, that's never going to happen. So we just don't know what will happen in 6 months. At the moment, we can say that we've got genuine interest on multiple properties, and there's some buyers that are out there looking to purchase. So I'll be saying take the decision to go now rather than sort of sit back and wait.
Great, thanks for that, Anthony. So we might, similar to you, we might start off with a bit of a brief summary of what's been happening in the rental market, particularly properties that are available for lease. So we've obviously got quite a lot of properties on the market at the moment in the Melbourne CBD. The market in the surrounding suburbs, there's quite a few properties, but a lot of the stock's being absorbed. So what we're seeing is that there's still a consistent level of inquiry, and this goes from, I suppose, South Melbourne out from the CBD. There's a good level of inquiry. There's a good level of interest there from potential tenants looking to secure a lease. Unfortunately, the CBD has been a little bit quiet, and that's what we've seen over the last month or so. There is a bit of a demand issue in the city where there is an oversupply of properties. At last count, there was about 8,500 properties available in the Melbourne CBD and immediate surrounds. So that's up 2,500 from 2 weeks ago when we last spoke. So pretty significant numbers there when we're usually tracking at about 1,000 to 2,000 at this time of year. So yeah, look, I think that will likely translate to potentially lower rents over the short to medium term. And we're finding the most successful ones and the successful properties being leased are really those ones there that are priced correctly, and even some would argue priced aggressively compared to others in the market. We had one particular instance where there was a small building with approximately 50 apartments in there. 25 of those apartments were available for lease. We had to do a $100 a week rent reduction in order to be the best priced apartment in the building. But we've secured a tenant within a couple of days. So, they're the sorts of difficult decisions that landlords are having to make at the moment, unfortunately. But we're guiding, obviously, our clients through that to make sure that we're able to get the best result and as quickly as possible, especially in the current market. Sorry, Anthony, you're on mute.
Sorry. There we go. I was just going to say, last time we spoke, you gave everyone sort of a good summary of handling rent reductions and requests from tenants. Since sort of then, there's been some government benefits that have come out more recently, and some government guidelines around that. Are you able to sort of give us a brief run through of what's been happening in the last couple of weeks on that front?
Sure. So I'll just I'll try and get some slides up on the screen. Get how to do it. All right. So I'm gonna pop this slide up there. So this will give you an idea of what we're seeing. I suppose what's been formalised over the last couple of weeks since we last spoke. So when we last spoke, these measures were just being announced. Actually got announced the afternoon a fortnight ago. So sorry for the amount of detail on the slides, but it's quite difficult to summarise all of the measures that are in there. So I'll try and go through these as quickly as possible. But it's a pretty significant change to the way we're operating at the moment in the rental space. The most significant one, and which has probably been the most widely publicised one, is that there's a moratorium on evictions. That thankfully has been clarified as part of this new omnibus bill that was released last week. So what they've essentially said is that rather than evicting a tenant, we can terminate a lease, but there is a slightly different process to go through about doing that. So firstly, there's obviously date limits involved. So pre-29 March, which is when these measures were backdated to, anything pre-29 March, standard process applies. And I had personal experience with that on Tuesday this week. Had a VCAT hearing where a possession order was granted based on the fact that we'd followed all the right steps on the pre-29 March measures. And the VCAT member actually clarified the fact that, the notice was served before the 29th of March, so therefore the pre-COVID rules applied. What they've essentially moved to do with terminating leases is that they've removed all notices to vacate. So from the 29th of March onwards, notices to vacate are no longer valid. So what that essentially means is that where we used to, after say 14 days of rental arrears, serve a notice to vacate to a tenant, we're now not able to do that. Instead of doing that, we can serve what they call, or apply for what they call, a termination application through VCAT, and provide the information to a member to decide on how best to terminate the lease. There is a special provision in there specifically allowing for a tenant failing to comply with their obligations under the Act, and failing to pay rent and not providing a reason for failing to pay rent. So therefore, if you're able to make the rent repayments but you're just choosing not to pay, that is grounds for them to terminate the lease. We're yet to see details on what that actually means for evictions. There's been instances throughout the last couple of weeks of the police being called out to evictions and not actually acting out the eviction orders. So we're still waiting on some information to come through from the REIV on that one there. But the way we understand it is that once a termination order has been granted, you can then hand that off over to Victoria Police, and then we can ask for an eviction to be undertaken.
Sorry, just a quick one, just to jump in there. That was to stop sort of those laws coming out about tenants holding rent strikes and those sorts of things. Is that sort of why they've implemented that one there?
That's correct. Yeah. So so they put that one there in place just to stop. There was a few Facebook groups that had formed where groups of tenants were essentially organising to not pay rent or withhold their rent, and just making a move that that I suppose the landlord should be covering the cost, and that they had a right to housing, so therefore shouldn't be paying any rent. So that one there is pretty clear in the fact that the VCAT member can obviously use discretion, but the VCAT member has been given guidance on how that particular termination notice should be enacted, and not paying rent just for the sake of not paying rent is not a valid reason. We are allowed to ask for financials. The tenant is obliged to provide us with financials, and there's a pretty strict measure that the government's put in place around that now as well. So thankfully, they've actually given us a calculation basis for hardship. That calculation basis is really that the tenant has to show that their rent is more than 30% of their gross income. So that's pre-tax income. They need to demonstrate that they're obviously in that hardship, but they also need to show that they've got less than $5,000 in savings. So they're pretty strict guidelines to go by, and that's how we've started assessing all the applications for rental assistance throughout this period now. So when it comes to rent reductions and deferrals, that's how we're assessing those.
That was the old, sorry again, just to try and this going back to my product management stage, but that's how we essentially used to approve applications. Was you look at their gross income, and if their wage was 33, the rent was more than 33% of their income, you'd be reluctant to sort of approve that application. So going back sort of 10, 11 years, when we that's the rule of thumb back then, which is the right way of sort of looking at it.
That's correct. Yeah, exactly. And look, that's the way we've decided to go about it. And like you rightly said there, Anthony, a lot of people, a lot of property managers still use that as a measure. Incomes have obviously changed a little bit since then. So typically you find that incomes are significantly higher than the rents, but it is always a good measure to go by. So I'm glad that the government's actually come out and clarified that, which has been quite useful. There's also a number of other measures that have been introduced as part of this as well. So one of them being that all rental increases have been suspended until 30 September. This means that rental increase notices have also been suspended till 30 September. So it actually has the effect of extending out a couple of months after the end of September, because obviously a rental increase notice requires us to give 60 days notice to the tenant. So therefore, if we can't provide notice until after the 30th of September, then you're looking at, really rental increases not taking effect for the majority of this year. So that's now been legislated. There can be a mediation process, but I'd say that rental increases are essentially off the table until December this year, based on what the legislation says. The enforcement of rent reductions and payment plans. So they have allowed for tenants to apply, similar to the way we can apply to tribunal, but they've allowed for tenants to apply to tribunal to enforce rent reductions. Again, the VCAT members have been provided with the guidance around hardship. Rent reductions can only be enforced and should only be accepted by property managers where the tenant is in hardship. So therefore, it obviously becomes really important for us to be able to collect all that information that we need to. Which is why when we spoke last time, we spoke about the fact that we were collecting all of that information in quite a measured manner, and making sure that we received all that information and kept it on file, because obviously that's something that the government's going to be asking for, and also potentially a VCAT member if it was to reach that point. The termination of leases by a tenant. So there's two there. One that's quite a difficult one, is that a tenant, if they're in financial hardship, can actually terminate their lease without penalty. Now, we're seeking clarification on what they mean by without penalty. Typically, there's lease break costs associated with breaking a tenancy, and that usually goes back to the costs incurred of finding a new tenant. So what typically happens is if a tenant breaks their lease, rather than charging the landlord another letting fee to try and find a replacement tenant, the outgoing tenant will pay a percentage of the leasing fee to the agent to find a tenant, and therefore the landlord doesn't get charged an additional leasing fee. Same with the advertising costs as well. So we pass the advertising cost on to the tenant, because again, it's not the landlord's decision to leave the property. So therefore, it's the tenant has to pay for the advertising costs. That has now been struck out quite clearly. But where there's a question mark, and we're waiting for clarification from Consumer Affairs on, is whether we can continue to collect rent from the tenant after the lease has ended if they've broken their lease. Very important at the moment, particularly given the vacancy rates in the city, where you could see a property sitting vacant for a number of months. We want to make sure that we're obviously collecting rental during that period, and that the tenant can't essentially walk away from their obligation and not pay any more rent. So we've sought some more clarification on that, but the way it reads at the moment is that they can leave without penalty if they're in hardship. So we're reading that to say that, yeah, sure, they can walk away without having to pay a lease break fee, but they're still responsible for rent up until that point. But we'll obviously clarify over the next couple of weeks as we get some more information from them on that. And then the last point there is around a tenant not being able to serve a notice to vacate. So a standard 28-day notice to vacate. So again, we've gone back to Consumer Affairs on that one there just for clarification. They've actually come back to the REIV and the industry as a whole and said the intention of that clause there was not to allow landlords to stop tenants from moving out of properties. It was more so that a tenant couldn't just serve a 28-day notice on a fixed term tenancy. So it's a bit misleading, that one there. We'll probably report on that one there a little bit more with a lot more detail in a fortnight's time. But at this stage, the way it reads, we can essentially knock back a 28-day notice to vacate, but the tenant can obviously still go and appeal that with Consumer Affairs and with the through the mediation process there as well. Sorry, I've got a couple of slides to go through because obviously there's been quite a bit of information that's come out over the last couple of weeks. So I just want to make sure that that all of it's there. And look, these slides I can make available to anybody after the session, and obviously happy to have a chat with anybody about them as well if there's particular things there that I suppose spark your attention. So there are some landlord benefits, so it's not all one-sided. There are some landlord benefits involved in what's been handed out over the last couple of weeks. So the first one is the $2,000 government grant. Now, we initially read that was going to be a grant given to tenants. It's not actually going to be handed out that way. So what the intention of this grant is to subsidise landlords for passing on a rent reduction to their tenant, provided the tenant is in severe financial hardship. So again, you can see there the measures of rent being greater than 30% of income, a rental reduction being negotiated, and a tenant having less than $5,000 in savings. If your tenant meets all of those criteria, then they can apply for a government grant for up to $2,000. But the key part is there that it's up to, so it's completely up to the government's discretion. It could be $500, it could be $100, it could be the full $2,000 to be paid to the agency. So it'll come into our trust account. It won't get paid to the tenant, and it gets paid to the trust account that's linked to the RTBA bond. So obviously the tenant has to make the application, put their bond details in there, and then the funds will be transferred into our trust account. And it comes through as a form of, I suppose, a rent compensation to the landlord for passing on a rent reduction. We've only started to just see a few of these started to come into the office and the application form, so we're still working through what the details look like. But it seems as though obviously the government's seen some sense here and seen that they do need to subsidise landlords for passing on these rent reductions, which is quite good. So as I said, we'll work with landlords and tenants on a case-by-case basis with that one there. But obviously there's those three pretty strict criteria which we need to be met as well. And then there was obviously the other two which I mentioned in the last one. So they've been formalised, which is access to a 25% discount on land tax. Again, that's going to be proportional to the rental reduction that's been put in place. So the government said that they'll provide up to a 25% discount. It's not a blanket 25%. And there's also there the potential there to defer land tax payments, the 2020 land tax payments to 2021. Those two measures there can be applied for by a landlord today through the State Revenue Office website. Perfect. I'll just, Anthony, I'll just check if there's any questions so far that have come through, or any questions that you might have on what's going on there at all.
No, I think you've covered off on everything pretty well. Yeah, I don't think there's nothing from me at this stage. I'm not sure if there's been any Q&As that are sort of relevant at this point. Are there?
No, I can't see any. I can't see any at all.
Yep.
That's okay. All right. So we can again, sorry again for a lengthy slide, but this is just more just to cover off on the commercial code of conduct. Obviously not only residential has been impacted here. It is also commercial. On the commercial side, there's been the code of conduct which has been in place for a number of weeks now. We are waiting on the regulations to be released, and so are quite a lot of solicitors, because a lot of these commercial leases have kept solicitors quite gainfully employed over the last few weeks. The information that I'm receiving at the moment is still fairly basic, but there's I suppose particulars on the ability to move tenants out of properties if they're not paying. So similar to the residential side, there will be provisions that allow for that, but it's still not clear. So they're waiting on these regulations. They're due any day. I believe there's been word that they'll be out by the end of the week, but they have been saying that for a couple of weeks now as well. So hopefully those regulations come out. But I'll provide just a really high level overview for a stock standard commercial lease, and what I suppose the initial negotiation process that we're getting involved in looks like. So the commercial code of conduct requires a tenant to firstly prove that they're eligible for the JobKeeper. So JobKeeper has some fairly strict rules around it, but essentially you need to show that you're a business generating less than $50 million in total turnover. You've had a reduction in turnover of greater than 30%. And you become eligible for that JobKeeper. Should you become eligible for JobKeeper, then the landlord has a responsibility under the code to pass on a waiver and deferral of rent on that commercial property, and the waiver and deferral is half and half. So I've put together a bit of a worked example just to really show you. A really simple way of, I suppose, looking at the way this is kind of calculated. So we've got Tony's barbershop. His monthly rental is $2,000 per calendar month gross. So I'm removing GST and outgoings and all that sort of thing out of there, because that just complicates the situation way too much. Lease has still quite a little bit left on it. It's ending at the end of this year, so 31 December 2020. So Tony's seen a drop in his turnover of 60% since the 1st of April. So that falls within the COVID-19 period. They're considering the 29th of March as being the beginning of everything, which is, I suppose, the start of all the shutdown. And obviously due to COVID-19, and it makes logical sense that, barbershops are being affected by that. You can see that he's had a 60% drop. He's provided financials to show that he's had a 60% drop in turnover from the 1st of April 2019 to the 1st of April 2020. And we've got the benefit of hindsight here. His turnovers returned to normal on the 1st of June 2020. So in this instance, what the code says is that the landlord should allow Tony to reduce his rental payments down to $800 per calendar month during the difficult period, being the 2 months of April and May. Tony will receive a rental waiver of $600 per calendar month, which is equal to 30% of his total rent, or half of his reduction in turnover. And Tony must then also pay the deferred rent, which is the other $600, or 30% of his total turnover. Or his total rental over the remaining term. So $600 by 2 months is obviously $1,200. He still has 6 months remaining on his lease, so therefore an extra $200 on every rental payment from the 1st of June onwards. So again, really simple explanation of how that works. But the idea is that the landlord wears half the cost of the reduction in rent in a waiver, and then the other half is deferral. Where the tenant doesn't want to engage with us when it comes to discussing what their financial situation is, and we have had a few that have refused to hand over financials, we can go to the Small Business Council and commence a negotiation at that point. But to this point, we haven't really had too many situations where that's the case. And again, like I said, the solicitors are being kept quite busy with ones that are just refusing to pay rental altogether. I don't think that's going to be all that favourable for those tenants that are just choosing not to pay any rental at all. It's not the intention of the code. The code is pretty clear on the fact that you need to pay rent where possible. So in an REIV webinar earlier today as well, the question was asked around tenants who don't necessarily need to, but have chosen to shut down their premises due to COVID-19. So, could have seen potentially a 50 or 60% reduction in turnover, but instead have closed their doors and seen a 100% drop in turnover. Is the landlord required to pass that on? Or required to wear 50% of that as a reduction and the rest as deferral. And they've said just to speak to the Small Business Commissioner and enter mediation. They're not giving any guidance on that. So again, it's a wait and see until these regs are released, and from there we'll hopefully be able to see some more information. All right, so Anthony, is there a question that's come through?
There is. It's from Ray. He just asked, and I'll just quickly publish that as well. But he just asked is for help. Is the government provide any help for landlords who can't find a tenant, and have a mortgage on their property? So essentially, a vacant property. Is there any relief from the government on those type of properties?
So, really good question. In short, not really. The government hasn't really considered that. As I said, the way the legislation's been written, it's very much in favour of the tenant, which makes it quite challenging. So obviously, there's there's the rule there where if a tenant's in financial hardship, they can essentially break their lease and walk away. That puts a landlord in a really difficult situation. Like I said, at the moment, where the market is quite challenging, and you may need to accept a significantly lower rental in order to lease your property. There's no consideration there for the financial hardship of the landlord, and this is something that the industry as a whole has been rallying for and trying to pressure the government into doing. But their view is that landlords can access a deferral of their mortgage, and hopefully a deferral of their land tax payments if it's applicable, which on apartments it generally isn't all that applicable.
Some properties don't even pay land tax on apartments because the land value is so small.
That's correct. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, significantly low land tax value. So that makes it really difficult. So the best advice I can give you, Ray, is probably go and speak to your bank about a deferral. That seems to be the only thing that's available at the moment. And obviously, if there's land tax applicable, then definitely apply for the State Revenue Office deferral of your land tax, because obviously there's going to be a bit of a saving, or a bit of a push back of expenses until next year, which hopefully should help from a cash flow perspective. Yep. Perfect. All right. Anthony, no more questions? Okay.
No more questions.
All right. Perfect. So I'll encourage everybody who's in. We've just over 20 attendees at the moment. So anybody that's there that wants to submit a question, please send it through. There's obviously an opportunity for Q&A at the end. Mm-hmm. We might now use this as a bit of an opportunity to have a bit of a chat to Kayani. So as Anthony mentioned, Kayani is a property manager in our property management department, obviously. Kayani looks after approximately 160, probably creeping up on 170 properties at the moment. And has been, I suppose, at the forefront of a lot of conversations with both tenants and landlords over the last few weeks about what's been happening. But maybe, Kayani, do you want to maybe just tell us a little bit about what it's been like to work from home? Talk about what we've been doing, how we've been communicating and everything as well.
Good evening, everyone. I hope everyone is doing great, looking after themselves and others around. First of all, Michael, I would like to take this opportunity and thank all the landlords out there for supporting us, believing in us, and most importantly, trusting us. I know it's an alien environment. We have never dealt with this before, and I'm pretty sure together we will cross the line, and hopefully we'll get there very soon. For us as property managers, Michael, nothing has changed. We're still working 9 to 5:30, sometimes even till 7:38, depending on how busy we are. We're still doing all our everything is as per normal, doing our routines, doing our looking after the areas, looking after the maintenance. Everything is as exactly the same. Only thing is that we are communicating more with the owners at the moment, plus the tenants, because at the moment I've seen a lot of people are suffering, and we're receiving a lot of inquiries at the moment, especially in regards to the rental reductions.
Yeah. No, that's good, and yeah, really, I think really good insights there by Kani, because that's what it has been. I personally know I haven't worked this hard in I can't remember how long, and it really has been a lot of discussions with people, a lot of time spent on the phone, just really getting into the nitty gritty of what's going on in individual circumstances, and I think that's probably the most challenging thing about what we're going through at the moment. It's not a cookie cutter approach that we can apply to these things. Every single circumstance, every situation is different. And that goes from the tenant situation through to the landlord situation. There's landlords there that are willing to pass on a rent reduction because they're in a position where they can afford to do that. There's others that are reliant on the rent to fund their retirement, and they can't afford to pass on a rent reduction because obviously that's going to affect them and the way they live. So that's where it becomes, I suppose, really challenging for us, and why we are spending so much time, I suppose, on the phone with people and trying to navigate through that. And look, I thank Kayani and the rest of the team for that as well, because it's been a huge amount of effort. And I'm just glad that we've been able to, I suppose, keep working so closely together, even though we're, I suppose, physically distant. So Kayani, on that as well, what other requests are coming through? So obviously you've been dealing with a lot of questions from tenants and from landlords as well around what it means financially for everybody, and discussing rents and things. But what other requests are coming in at the moment?
Michael, right now the most common requests are definitely rent reductions. So basically, what I am doing, and most of the property managers in our team, in our office, what we do is we assess their situation first. We go through their documents. We check if they are actually after rent reduction or they're just fiddling around with the system. Only after that we approach the owners. And once again, most of the owners are so generous out there. They are actually giving out good reductions just to keep the tenants in the property at this time of trouble. So I can't thank all those owners enough.
Yeah, no, look, that's a really good message, and I think I think that's also been part of the decision-making process too. The fact that obviously there are fairly high vacancy rates at the moment, so we are trying to hold on to tenants wherever possible. But at the same time, we're making sure that I suppose the system's not being taken advantage of, which is why we introduced that measure quite early on, even before the government really requested us to, but making sure that we got the correct information around financials and everything like that to make sure that there was a complete picture there before we actually presented that to the landlord. And just I suppose other piece of work that we're working on at the moment, Kayani, do you want to maybe touch on the fact that, or talk about how we're doing things like routine inspections these days?
Michael, as I mentioned before, like for us, nothing has changed. The only difference is we are more often we are working from home. So with as far as the routine inspections are concerned, we are doing virtual inspections at the moment. So what we do is we send out the links. Sometimes I have actually gone through my tenants stepwise, like what they are supposed to do. That link is it's basically self-explanatory. What they have to do is just open it up, start taking photos and send it back to us. Once we finalize the reports, owner won't find any difference. Like it will be exactly the way that we were doing before. So most of the agencies I know, they are not actually going through routine inspections, but we at IRE, we're trying our best to advise owners how the property conditions are at the moment, and also staying on top of our routine work.
Just a quick question on that. Are we finding the tenants are probably having their properties presented in a better way when we're doing routine inspections than what we would walking through a property? Because I know if I was to take a photo of my living area or my stove or oven, if I had to send it to someone, I'd probably make the effort to clean it a little bit better than than I would if someone's just walking through taking photos. Are we finding that? Is that common?
Absolutely, Anthony. I've seen a major difference in that. Like, I remember some of my properties, I used to go there, and some of the tenants, they least bother. They never used to keep it clean. Like, it used to be messy, but now I've seen there's a major difference. People are actually looking after their properties. They're keeping it clean, and every time when we ask them to send us the reports or do those reports on behalf of IRE, they do clean the property and then only send out the photos and that report to us.
Yeah, no, that's great, and I think it's a bit of an odd one. So we also expected the maintenance requests to be coming through thick and fast at this period of time, because obviously people are spending a lot more time at home. But it's been quite the opposite. I know personally I haven't really received very many rental requests at all for the properties that I manage, and speaking to the property managers too, it seems to be pretty consistent. So you know, if there's one positive to draw out of it is the fact that the number of maintenance requests have reduced, but obviously, you know, people are spending more time at home, and then, you know, they're potentially looking after their things a lot better than what they were, and keeping the place a bit cleaner. So yeah, look, it's been positive, and I've used that platform as well, Kyani, the tenant assisted inspections that we're doing, and it works well. So basically, you know, on a user interface side, on the tenant side, they essentially get an email with a link from us. The link, like Kayani said, is extremely self-explanatory. Takes them through step by step on how to take photos of the property in the areas that we expect photos of, and it covers off on all the key points. So, you know, making sure that we get photos of the kitchen and inside the oven and of the stovetop and the bathroom, and, you know, even inside the toilet bowl, and all the things that we do as property managers when we physically inspect the property. And if there's ever any qualms, I know some of the property managers have tried to do Zoom or FaceTime calls with the tenants as well, just to understand what the property actually looks like as well on a video sense. And yeah, look, they've worked well. And I think probably the best part of it is the fact that there's consistency in reporting there. So you'll still receive the same reports from us as you've always received. And we have that consistency on our end as well. So we can refer back to these routine inspection reports during this period of time and say, okay, well, you know, the property is being maintained there the same as what it was previously. So yeah, obviously it's been a good platform so far. Perfect. All right, Anthony, have we got any more questions that have come through at all?
No questions that have come through at this stage. Not from my end anyway.
All right.
So I guess we have we can fire off a couple of questions to each other if you like.
Yep.
And just sort of
more than happy to do that.
Chat.
More than happy to do that. I'll let you start off with a question, because you've probably had a few over the last few days.
Yeah, thanks for throwing me under the bus on that. No, I didn't have anything prepared yet, to be honest. I was just more so just going to open up the discussion. But I guess, Karen, you were saying before that a lot of the requests that, and both to you and Michael, we've been having discussions with tenants, a lot of the requests that have been coming through from tenants. Are we finding that the majority of them are experiencing hardship? Is there some cases where tenants are trying to take advantage of the situation at the moment, and in these situations?
Anthony, majority of them are actually going through hardship. Just for example, just before this meeting, 10 minutes before, I received an email from one of my tenants. He was making $6,000 before COVID-19 struck. Now he's gone down to $5,000. He has to pay $1,900 per month, and he's still asking for rental reduction. So definitely, I'm not going to go to the owner. Definitely, I'm not going to ask for any rental reductions. I'll simply speak with the tenant, advising him this is what the situation is. I'll go through the laws. I'll let him know. Maybe it's all like, we just have to educate. I know some people are out there who are trying to abuse the system, but that is how, like, as Michael explained before, like, we introduced those forms and everything way before other companies started introducing. So that is basically working for us and doing wonders. So we can easily know who is actually trying to abuse. Just for example, Anthony, let's suppose I'm a renter. If my rent is due on the 10th of every month, if I approach you on the, say, 20th or the 22nd of the month saying that, sorry, Anthony, I don't have money, what will you think? It means I'm not interested. I was never serious about this. Maybe I'm trying to abuse the system now. if I was interested, I think I would have asked for an introduction straight away when I have, number one, maybe lost the job or put down from my company. I would not wait for maybe 10 days or 15 days past my rental and then ask you guys for rental introductions. No.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm noticing at the moment.
I think, Michael, we had a similar situation. A tenant contacted you the day before the rent was due and saying that he was unable to pay his rent.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so I had one last week actually. So I had a phone call the day before the rent was due, saying rent's due tomorrow. Hours have been cut due to coronavirus. I'm unfortunately able to pay the rent, and it becomes a fairly simple response. So you say that's fine. Fill out the form, send that back. We'll assess the application and do that. However, how long have your hours been cut for, and what's the situation? Hours have been cut for the last 4 or 5 weeks. Well, I'm not really sure why I'm getting a phone call the day before the rent's due to do that. So I said, at that point in time, I'm sorry, but the rent's due tomorrow as usual, until we receive enough information to assess otherwise. And look, the tenant was great about it. He said, look, yeah, that's fine. I understand. He's since provided information. We've gone to the landlord and we've assessed the situation. But that's where I think, if there's one positive to draw or another positive to draw out of the fact that these, the new omnibus legislation is passed, is the fact that there isn't really going to be any tolerance paid for people that aren't really engaging with the process. Similar to a situation where a tenant might refuse to provide financial information. We've had that a couple of times where they've said, well, I'm not going to provide you with pay slips and I'm not going to provide you with a termination letter, and why should I be sending you copies of my bank statement? Well, all that information is provided to us at the time of making an application for the property anyway. So I don't see why that should be an issue, or why it's any different to the way it is now. So like I said, in most cases people are being reasonable about it. Like Kayani said, there's a couple that have tried to take advantage of the system, but just having good process in place has just helped stamp a lot of that out.
Yeah, I guess just on that as well. I mean, if you were to go to the bank, and I was having this discussion with my bank manager a couple of weeks ago, and if you were to walk in there, because I think the banks are offering 6-month deferrals and those sorts of things, it's not as easy as just walking to the bank and asking that question to a teller, and then just putting that onto your loan and happy days. They've got the same thing. So for us, for an owner of a property that has to ask for reductions on their mortgages and deferments, they've got to go through that process as well. So I think we're not just going to take it on word or on an email from a tenant or anyone that says that they're in hardship. So
yeah. No, exactly. I've just received a question via text message, Anthony. I'll read it out. So questions come through saying, what happens to those who leave a property and are unable to get a tenant? So I'm assuming this is from the landlord side. Tenant breaks a lease and the landlord is unable to get a tenant. Is there any assistance provided? So look, at this stage, not a whole lot. Like I said, the way we understand the legislation to be read is that there is no penalty. Well, that's what the legislation says. There will be no penalties that the tenant has to pay for breaking a lease. But what we're waiting on clarification for is the rent until we find a new tenant. And to be honest, that's the most important piece for us at the moment. The lease break fees, which typically go towards finding a new tenant, so the search fee as well as the advertising fee, are fairly minor compared to the rent until we find a new tenant. So in most cases, you're probably talking about say $500-600 worth of lease break fees compared to a rental of $1,500 to $2,000 a month. So there's obviously a pretty significant financial difference there, but they've not yet clarified what is meant by that. I know initially on Consumer Affairs website there was a post put up there by them under the tenant section saying that you can break your lease without, and this was publicly available, and a tenant actually screenshotted it and sent it through to us. You're able to break your lease without penalty, without having to pay rent, and eligible for a full bond refund if you're in financial hardship. That's since been removed, thankfully. I'm not sure what they meant by putting that up or who approved for that to be put up, because it's not in line with the legislation at all. But I suppose that's what we're dealing with at the moment, where we're really just, information's released, we're asking for clarification, and in a week's time, we find out the truth of the matter and exactly what's going on. But at this stage, the way it reads is that they can exit a lease without penalty, provided they're in financial hardship. And that is a big caveat. They still need to prove that they're in financial hardship. They can't just break the lease because they choose to break the lease. Going on that point, actually, that's probably an important one. So we've had a number of tenants who have simply walked into the office, dropped keys off, and said, "I'm breaking my lease. Sorry, I've got no money to pay the rent." Based on the reading of the legislation, that is not a valid excuse whatsoever. It's quite clear that you need to prove financial hardship. That tenant in that particular case hasn't proven financial hardship, so we are claiming their full bond, and we're making sure that we claim the full bond. And we'll also be asking VCAT for an order of compensation in that case as well, for all of the rents up until we either lease the property or the remainder of the lease, as well as lease break fees and everything else. So that tenant's just made a decision to return keys without engaging us, without providing any information, without proving financial hardship. So therefore, the landlord should not be penalised in that situation.
Yep. There's questions also come through. It was a question to me, and it was around, that's visible there, but it says if we're finding on the demand lower or higher on low value apartments, so e.g. 1-bedroom apartments, we're expecting this to change over the next 1 to 2 months, or 2 to 3 months. I get, from a sales perspective, we're seeing interest on a lot of properties and a lot of different price points. So for instance, on the weekend, was at a property where we had, it was around the $600,000 value market, 2-bedroom property in Docklands. We had 5 groups inspected on Saturday, but at the same time, we also had a property on St Kilda Road at a lower price point where we had 2 inspections on. I was there tonight doing the same thing, 2 inspections. So I guess there's buyers for every price range. There's buyers for every type of property. What we're finding though, really at the moment, is that if the property's got to present really well, and we've got to make those decisions on to make sure that it presents and stands out in the marketplace, as we always have, but even more so now. So we are seeing demand for 1-bedroom apartments all the way up to 3 bedrooms. So everything is seeing in what can we see in the next 2 to 3 months as these questions come through. We're expecting that to change. It's hard to say what the next, I guess 30 days will look like, let alone 2 to 3 months. But at the moment, there's definitely interest out there for those type of properties.
So leading on from that a little bit as well, Anthony, what are your thoughts on properties that are vacant at the moment? If someone's considering selling, and I know we talked about that a little bit, whether now's the right time and all that sort of stuff. But obviously, there's some landlords that have properties that are vacant at the moment that could potentially be vacant for, for the short term at least. Is it worthwhile inquiring now to see what they're worth and potentially getting an appraisal done whilst they're vacant? So obviously, I know it's a bit more challenging to usually get through with tenants in there, and it's only going to get more challenging as well with the new Tenancy Act that's going to be introduced at the end of the year. Is now an opportunity to maybe go and get a market appraisal and see whether it's actually worth putting on the market whilst there's not a tenant in there?
Definitely, yeah, definitely. And you also open up the opportunity that if you are looking to sell now, you've got owner occupiers. We had a really big part of our buying group that was out towards the later part of last year and even up until now is first home buyers, and they always have that, because they're able to get under 600 or under 750 the stamp duty savings and exemptions on that. So we're seeing a lot of those buyers coming into our market and purchasing those type of properties. And it's always a little bit tricky for them to buy a property that's tenanted because they want to move into it right away. They're excited about buying a property. They're wanting to move in. So definitely, if the property is there and you've had the thought of selling it, there's probably no better time to do it while you are in the process of looking for a tenant, and give that a shot. We're happy to go out and see the property. If it's vacant, we'll go out, do an appraisal, give you a call. We're even happy to sort of FaceTime or video WhatsApp you as well while we're there. So it gives you an opportunity to see the property, and we can discuss, if it needs any work prior to marketing it for sale, or if it's worthwhile investing a little bit of money in hired furniture. So yeah, definitely a good time to be looking at it now.
Right, no, that's good. Just one thing I will touch on as well, because we've got the time at the moment. So one thing that has also come out of this is that there's been a delay to the new Tenancy Act. So the 2018 updates to the Tenancy Act, which were due to come into effect on the 1st of July this year, and they were pretty far-reaching changes. So there's changes to the way we serve notices. There's new requirements on having electrical inspections done annually or every second year on properties, and a range of other measures, including having to pay or having to subsidise tenants' rent for sales open for inspections if they're being held. Those have been pushed back now to, they say no later than the 1st of January 2021. So they've essentially been pushed back 6 months, but the government has the power to pull them back should we kind of come out of this situation a little bit faster than expected. So that is a good thing. The idea that our office is having is we'll likely do a range of these style events where I suppose the property managers will present to everybody on what the changes are, how they'll affect your investment property, what it will mean financially for you as well, because there was obviously a few that carry some financial costs associated with them as well, but also just what it means, I suppose, in terms of how you interact with your tenant, because there's some pretty big changes there, including not calling them a tenant anymore. So yeah, we'll have to change the language and everything too. But we've got 6 months more to kind of think about that. So obviously we'll keep communicating those changes to you, and yeah, keeping you updated on that as well. Now I might just do a quick fly around. Kayani, is there anything at all that you wanted to add?
Not really, Michael. All good.
Great, perfect. Anthony, anything from you at all?
I just a quick one, and this is more so to our government people, just commending them on a great job that they've done. I think we were speaking before this, Michael, that there's 20 active cases of coronavirus in Victoria currently, which is great. I mean, they've done a fantastic job. All the measures that they've brought in have been great up until this point of trying to stop the spread of the virus. So I mean, that's take your hat off to them. They've done an incredible job. You look around the world and what's happening in other countries. It's awful, and it's really saddening. But it's great to see that how we've responded to this, and I'm sure that we'll be able to set up better for it after we come out through this. I think we'll be in a great spot.
Yeah, definitely. No, look, well said, Anthony. I think that's it. It's they do need to be commended for the way this has all been dealt with. It's been good. Like I said, we're flying pretty quickly in terms of trying to adapt to all these things that are being presented to us. But look, in the whole, I think it's positive. We're hopefully going to be in a situation in a month's time that we're talking to you where we're all in the office and everything's going okay. But look, if there's also some positives that come out of it, I think it's the fact that we will continue doing these a lot more regularly. It's been a great way to reach out to a large number of our clients, in a very current kind of state, and present situations like this to as quickly as we possibly can. And visual is always a nice way of doing it. So I think we've all become accustomed to doing these video conferences and doing these webinars as much as we possibly can. So they expect them to be a fairly common occurrence even after we're out of this thing. So perfect. All right. Well, we might wrap it up there. I've just put up on the screen mine and Anthony's direct contact details there as well. So if you've got any questions at all after this, sales, rentals, anything else at all, you can send us an email directly there on either one of our email addresses. Any feedback on what you'd like to hear in future sessions? As I mentioned, we'll be doing another one in a couple of weeks' time. So we'll likely do it every Wednesday fortnight. And yeah, like I said, if there's any particular areas you want us to cover off on, appreciate that feedback. But again, thank you to those who've joined live. Thank you to those who will hopefully watch the recording of this over the next couple of days and everything too. And obviously, make sure everybody stays safe and keep well. Thank you very much.
Thanks for Carney for giving up your evening to join us as well. Thanks so much.
And thank you
Thank you
for
very much.
Carney as well.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
guys.
Thanks, Si. See you later.
Yeah.